Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful once again that we can come together through the internet and through thy Holy Spirit, that we can be united to study your word and to look at the light that's been shining upon our path, especially in regards to July 18th and the prophecy of Josiah and Josiah Litch. And we ask, Lord, that you can enlighten our minds, help us to understand these things clearly, and that you can help us share these things with others. Lord, we all have difficulties and trials that we face, and there's more trials ahead. We just ask, Lord, that this light can be a lamp to our feet, that it can guide us as we may walk through the valleys of the shadow of death as time goes on. And so we need your presence, we need your love and your comfort and your peace. And so we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So this week we're continuing our studies on Josiah Litch's prophecy. Specifically, last week we went through the basic structure of his prophecy, and we started to look at things like the period of 391 years. Why is it 391 years? It is not some arbitrary period of time. And we found that we could analyze his prophecy. And that's one of the things that's interesting when it comes to the light that we have, because I've been spending time, and I know others have, looking at past prophecies. But specifically for me, it's been the chronology of those prophecies, the various dates. And without that, I wouldn't have been able to understand Josiah Litch's prophecy, the things that become very, very obvious. Now we're going to draw it out again and just really briefly look at the structure. And there's a lot more that we missed that, I don't necessarily want to go back on. I don't want to go back and study the period prior to 1299 in this study, though there is lots there. So we did touch on it, but we're going to continue looking at this prophecy, but we need to understand it, its structure. Now, it's a good idea for people to practice drawing these things out. I find it useful because I present it so many times that when I draw out a line, it helps stick it in my mind. So I would even recommend that when people are watching these videos that they draw some of these things out. You maybe don't have to put all the details in, but at least draw some of it. So we know that the prophecy begins on July 27th, 1299. So I put the Gregorian year up here. And this happens to be the 26th day of the fourth month. So this becomes this powerful symbol that helped unlock this prophecy. And this is August 3rd on the Gregorian calendar. So all the dates up here are Gregorian. These are all Julian. And this is the biblical calendar. But I also have other calendars. I have the Islamic calendar. So in the Islamic calendar, I believe this is the 26th day of the 10th month. Now this one isn't. It's this one over here. When we get the 150 years, 1449. Now this date, if I put the biblical date here, the 26th day of the fourth month, this will be July 18th on the Julian, and this will be July 27th on the Gregorian. And so Josiah Litch, he just looked at July 27th and July 27th. So he really would have seen this, even though he never thought about it, he would have seen this as July 27th, Julian. So he wouldn't have actually had this date in his mind. He wouldn't have thought of July 18th. He would have thought of this date, but as a Julian date. So we're just taking the biblical date and applying it here and saying that the 150 years here, if we're using a biblical date, would end here And the Islamic date for here is the 26th day of the 10th month. Now, we also have...
sorry, it is the 26th day of the 10th month in 1299.
Okay, good, thank you. I was hoping you would... Yes. And which date is it here?
I'll just check. I'll have to check. Hold on.
Yeah, that's right. This one would be... Anyway, this is another date. He's going to check that out. Now, we also know that we can break this prophecy up into 360 years, 30 years, 1 year, because this, and we have also 15 days. And this is the way that Josiah Litch laid it out. He didn't necessarily mark these, but we can see that he did it this way rather than this way. He added the 15 days at the end. And so this brings us to August 11th, 1840. So this is 1840 here, this part. And we would then also mark the 26th day of the 4th month on each of these dates. And even here, the 26th day of the 4th month. But you'll find that this date here, which is July 27th, is in 1840. So maybe I'll just do it this way. July 27th, 1840 is the 26th day of the 4th month. The Julian date is July 15th, where on these two, the Julian date is July 27th. So you got July 27th lining up either on the Julian or the Gregorian calendar in each of these years. Now this is August 8th, and this is August 8th. But the event that's fulfilled in this history comes 12 days earlier. So I put 12 days in here, and even here. This is then July 27th. So on the Gregorian date, we have the Treaty of Dardanelles. On this one, on July 27th, again, 12 days before the 26th day of the 4th month, we are going to have the collective note. And then again, 12 days before July 27th, this time it's going to be the Julian date that's going to be marked in the Gregorian. So this is July 15th. It's probably pretty little for people to read, but this is the ultimatum. The ultimatum is signed here, and that ultimatum is delivered 27 days later on August 11th, 1840. So this then is delivered here. So it's kind of jammed in here a little bit, but I'm going to be going further that way.
The Islamic date I have is the 27th day of the 5th month,
Right.
for 1449.
Yeah. 27th day of the 5th month. Yeah. And you can see the Islamic calendar, even though it's a lunar calendar, sometimes will vary from the biblical count of the month. One is they observe each month, where this is this part of the year is based on 3029, 3029, but also they're using Mecca, and sometimes different places, to mark when they see the first visible crescent. So they might be a day different based upon their location, because lunar calendars are affected by where you are in seeing the first visible crescent. So this date here, the same date that happens here. So when we get to this 26th day of the 4th month, which is July 27th, it's going to again align with the 27th day of the 5th month. Because this lunar calendar here, the Islamic calendar experiences 403 years, while the Gregorian calendar experiences 391 years. So that's why this happens. And it becomes this exact lining up of also the solar calendar, the biblical calendar, the Islamic calendar. So this part of it here, I mean, we sort of gone over it. I'm introducing more calendars here. And just muting somebody there. So we're going to have some more calendars to look at. But now we know that we've taken this history, and just like Ezekiel, we've taken Ezekiel, which has the symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month, and we projected Ezekiel into the future. So with Ezekiel, we have this date over here, which is the 10th day of the 5th month. And this is the Julian date, so I'll give myself a bit more room. So it's the Julian date, July 18th, and it's the 10th day of the 5th month. So in doing this initially, I did not really connect this with Josiah Litch's prophecy to get this date. I mean, it was partly connected and understood some of the symbolism, but really this was just knowing that we had November 9th, which we had marked as midnight, and I was just looking forward, and I used the symbols of Ezekiel 20 and Ezekiel 2020 to give me the year 2020 to find this date, the 10th day of the 5th month in 2020. And I noticed it was July 18th. Now, July 18th was significant to me for a number of reasons. So July 18th is significant because it's the number of days ordinally from the first day of the 1st month to the 10th day of the 7th month. So it's an important symbol in that sense. It's also Samuel Snow's last letter, which is 3 days before midnight. So 3 days becomes a symbol of a prediction before midnight. And so July 18th is this prediction before midnight. And it's part of a chiastic structure. And then when I found the 10th day of the 5th month, July 18th, and I counted from June 22nd, well, I counted backwards, 391 and a half days, and I came to June 22nd, which is Samuel Snow's 3rd letter. And then I found that the structure of Samuel Snow's letters, which I'm going to get into in some other studies where I go through them more, but there was a structure in Samuel Snow's letters that we had recognized, which was the chiasm that went from February 16th to May 2nd to July 18th. But this revealed another chiastic structure of 126 days that matched the period of time from the camp meeting in June 9th, 2018 to October 13th, 2018, and then the 391 days match that. So and I'm just mentioning it cursorily here, so I'm not going to go to that in detail, but just to point out that I came to this date, the 10th day of the 5th month, which is July 31st, basically independent of matching it here. I had symbols that were from here, obviously 391 and a half days, even though that came from Ezekiel, from the period of the kings. I could still see that there was this symbolism that came from Josiah Litch's prophecy. And that is why I continue looking at Josiah Litch's prophecy to try to understand its connection here. It was actually Stephen who sent me an email which had this rather convoluted sort of argument that somehow we could count from August 11th to July 31st, and that we could use 150 years based upon this 15 days at the end. So when we look, let's go here. So when we looked at Ezekiel's prophecy was based upon 391.5 years. Now we know that Josiah Litch's prophecy has this period that is 391 years and 15 days. And when we looked at 15 days, well, we could see that this is a half of a month. So I could look at it as 391 years and 0.5 months. So in a prophetic time, a month is 30 days. So 0.5 of a month is 15 days. So Stephen then took this half of a month and he would say, well, a year, a prophetic year, and I said 150, it's 180 years. So, it's not the 150 years here, it's 180 years. From August 11th, that's how he was thinking, that somehow we could find...
What was July 27th?
You were going from July 27th?
Yes, but it took us to July 27 in 2020, so it was 4 days short.
Okay, so that was it. Yeah, so he was using July 20. That makes sense. Yeah, you were using July 27th, and it brought us to July 27th, but he's using the Gregorian calendar, where I'm using the biblical calendar here. So if I count 180 years, because 0.5 of a year is 180 days, so if I'm going to count that period of time, I'm going to come not to here, because I'm going to be using the biblical calendar, the 26th day of the 4th month. So I'm going to come 13 days short of July 31st. So he had come to July 27th, which was 4 days short of this, using the Gregorian calendar. But I decided to use the biblical calendar because that's what I'd been using all along. So this becomes 180 years, though we can look at it as 6 months. And we know that this period here is 150 years, which is 5 months. And this period here ends with the Julian date, July 18th. It starts on a Julian date, July 27th. Here, we're starting with the Gregorian date, July 27th, and we're ending with the Julian date, July 18th. So this is the 6 months. This is the 0.5 years, right? Now it becomes symbolically 180 days, which is 180 years. Now, in doing this application, there's some criticisms that people could bring to it. So first off, people say, well, why can I take this half of a month, this 15 days, and ignore it? Because this is produced already symbolically, it's just an hour. So now I'm taking a symbol that was an hour, I'm turning it into prophetic time, and then I'm taking that prophetic time, that half of a month, and I'm turning it again into another period of prophetic time. So, and I understood the logic. Why can we do that? And the questioning why we can do that. And I'm not sure if I can give a satisfactory answer that, because I can't think of a precedent of it, except that one of the things we do not do is we do not reapply prophecies. That is, we don't take old established prophecies and just reinterpret them in like literal time in our period. That is, some people, they will say, well, this prophecy here was faulty. It was wrong. Josiah Litch got it wrong. And we're going to actually just apply it in a futuristic sense, like the evangelicals do. And the one thing that we've never done is we've never done that. We can take these time elements and see them as symbols, and we can apply them. But one of the things is that we're always based on the reality of that prophecy being fulfilled in the past. So we know that this prophecy was fulfilled, and we accept its fulfillment, but we start to analyze it. Now, the best argument I have for doing this, I actually have from looking at Ezekiel. So when I look at Ezekiel and I see the symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month, and I see that symbol repeated through history, not just for the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 or 70 AD, but also Vesuvius, the city of Constantinople, when it's reclaimed by Eastern Rome from Western Rome, or when I look at Mexico City, whatever it was called, I can't remember the name, how to pronounce it, but when its walls fell on the 10th day of the 5th month. So the symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month keeps reoccurring. But in Ezekiel, we can show that even though he was predicting, just like Josiah Litch in a sense is predicting an event here, he was predicting 586, the 10th day of the 5th month, for the destruction of the temple. He did it in an indirect way. But he was also predicting an event in the future. He was predicting the 10th day of the 5th month in 70 AD, and that was connected by 666 years, starting with the captivity of Jehoiachin. And we could then see that we could apply, based upon the symbols of the 20th day, or the 20th year based on 2020 in Ezekiel 20 verse 1 and Ezekiel 20:20, then we could see that we could predict that, or we could take it into the future. So the fact that we already had this date, and that we could look at this symbolically as 15 days as now being 180 years, and that we got the same date, but this time on the Gregorian calendar, seemed to me a very strong witness that this was not a fluke, because it's very unlikely. Now, somebody could argue, well, we could have done it a few different ways, and so we chose one way, maybe we could have chose some other way to get this to happen. And I think actually we have. I can actually get to this history, as we saw yesterday, with the 70 weeks. We have the symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month, the destruction of Jerusalem, in Daniel chapter 9. And we also have, in the midst of the 70th week, that period of 7 years where 31 is the middle. So we have the symbol of July 31st in the week of Christ, connected with the destruction of Jerusalem. And so we see it's already connected in this history. And so we probably could have used, even if we hadn't have used this, we might have come up with this date some other way. And maybe there's other ways that we could have arrived at this date that we haven't even seen. Now we have these two different dates, and the question is now arising, well, we're expecting an attack on the United States by Islam. And so we have this date, and it was this date that initially then I saw that there was an attack by Islam. When I had this date, July 18th, I wasn't saying Islam is going to attack the United States. I saw this as a destruction of Jerusalem. But when I had this symbol, I could now see this is Islam. Now, we then had all these different witnesses, which I'm not going to look into, but we had all these different witnesses that started to show that this would be in Nashville. And way too many things even to mention right now. But Acts 27, the latitude, the measurements of the temple itself, the Parthenon temple in Nashville, so the coordinates of it, the latitude and the longitude, both reveal symbols to talk about a message to the Levites. So we have this message to the Levites, and this is what we're looking at in this history, and we have all these lines. So all these different things showing that there's this message to the Levites. So we have these two dates, and we can see that they obviously are connected. So the 26th day of the 4th month and the 10th day of the 5th month are connected. And I've also connected them using the Mayan calendar. And so I started showing some of that last week, a little bit. Some things dealing with the Islamic calendar and the 391 years and its significance. But we know that the Mayan calendar starts, and I don't know if we can see this, we should be able to see this. It starts, if you write it as a Gregorian date, August 11th, 3113. Now you wouldn't really call this BC. You might call it BCE or something like that. But this date is September 6th, 3114 BC. And so I was reading a book where a person was writing about calendars, and basically the whole idea of how calendars are connected to astronomy. And he mentions this calendar, the Mayan calendar, because it's a day count calendar. And the interesting feature that this calendar has is that it's structured almost like an address, HTML address or whatever, computer address, where you'll have these periods, and these represent groups of 20 or 18. So this is a group of 20, this is a group of 18. So this is 20 days. This is a group of 18 of these 20 days. This one's a group of 20. So if you have a 1 here, it would be 18 times 20. So each one of these represents 18 times 20 days. And then this number represents 20 of these. And then this one represents 20 of these. And once you get up to this, so if you had 19, 17, 19, 19, 19, and then you go one more day, you would all set back to 0. So, I've explained this in some other places, and I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail somewhere, sometime. I don't think I will do it today. But this idea of this day count calendar is very useful, and we also can then date things very precisely in the Mayan period, because they give us these dates, and so we can know exactly when things happen in Mayan history because they date everything. And it's a very precise kind of dating calendar. Now, it goes all the way back here. Now, of course, this date, August 11th, when I looked at this Gregorian type date, and I saw August 11th, I thought it was a Julian date. And that would be natural, because if you're going to have a date in the past, you're going to have a Julian date, not a Gregorian date. Now, and I also assumed, even though sometimes you should always write these, if you write a BC date, you don't put a minus in front of it. A minus means you're using a system that has a 0 in it, because this is really an ordinal count. But if I put a minus sign, technically speaking, that should represent a negative, and you can only have a negative if you have a 0. You're using a 0 system. So that's why this represents 3114 BC, if this is a Gregorian count. Now, astronomers will often use this. They will put a minus sign. They don't use BC, but they usually use a Julian calendar. They don't use the Gregorian calendar. So this is kind of an out-of-place date. You wouldn't see this date in most books, definitely not in astronomy books. So they're kind of mixing two different systems together here. But what I thought is that this was a Julian date, and so I assumed that it was August 11th, 3113 BC. And when I looked up this date, it was the 26th day of the 4th month. But of course it was wrong, because that's not when the Mayan calendar starts. This is actually, I can remember the number of days that it is. I think it's 390 days off or something like that. I'd have to look it up again, the number of days difference here. So this is actually a later date. This one's earlier, right? So yeah, it would be less than 390. I can't remember the number. Anyway, so this is 3114 BC, but I thought it was a year later, August 11th. So it'd be less than 365 days. So it'd be, maybe take 25 off there, so 340. Maybe that was the number. Anyway, so this was wrong, but I noticed this date. So this was the date for Islam, and this is the date for Islam. But when I looked at the actual correct date, it was the 10th day of the 5th month. So I did this back in 2018, back in November 2018. Late November, I think it was, when I started, early November, because I did a sermon on it. So this date here and this date here are these symbols, and they're both connected to the Mayan calendar. So it was extremely unlikely that you would just have the mistake date and the correct date giving us both these dates. So that was the thing that was very profound for me initially. But I didn't really understand the Mayan calendar at that time. And so I'm not going to go into all of the things we've learned from the Mayan calendar, but the idea then that we could take these two numbers and that they were somehow connected allowed me to see that I could use the Mayan calendar in prophecy. So, and it makes sense when you think about the calendars that we have. The Gregorian calendar is a papal calendar. Pope Gregory is the one who introduced it. And then we know, of course, that the Julian calendar is introduced in 46 BC by Julius Caesar. So that is a pagan Roman calendar. So you have a papal Roman calendar and a pagan Roman calendar. And we can use these in prophecy. We know we can because Adventists use these calendars. So we have all these dates that are symbols. 70 AD, for instance, is a symbol. And that's based upon a Gregorian or Julian calendar. Both will give you 70 AD. So the fact that we can use these dates and they have symbolic importance means that we can use these pagan and Roman papal calendars. Now we can use them because the prophecies are addressing these powers. So it makes sense that God is going to use the calendars of these nations that are part of prophecy. So some people object, and I know not many people in this message do, but some people think, oh, we should only use the biblical calendar. Well, that would be really difficult to do. You wouldn't really know when something occurred. If you were going to really use the biblical calendar, you couldn't connect it to our date. Some people actually object to us connecting a date to a Julian or Gregorian date, even just to analyze when it was. So it would be very difficult not to use these calendars to understand chronology. Now we could use the Julian day number. That's just a day count calendar. And it's actually not as easy to use as this one. This one I can tell a lot by it. I can tell by the number, how many periods of 360 days has passed by counting this number. And so I can take these, I know if I have, and it only goes up to 17. Once it gets to 18, this goes to 1, that goes to 0. But I can, let's say it was, the date was 060 here at the end. Well, I would know that this 6 represents 6 times 20. So it would be very easy for me to understand how many days that is. That's going to be 120 days. And whatever this number is, that's just going to be the number of days. And whatever this number is, that's going to be 360 days, because 18 times 20 is 360. So if I have a number here, let's say I had 777, I would know that 7 here represents 20 days. The 7 here, I would have to add 140 days to that. And then the other 7, I'd add 7 days. So I could say I have 2520 plus 147 days if this was 777. So it's really easy to figure out how many days it is. But also I can then easily, once I have a grouping of days and I know how many days are in a year, every time I add 1 year, I'm going to move 5 days difference in my dates. Then I just have to pay attention which ones are leap years. So I find it's really easily, when I have a Mayan date, I can clearly place it in a period of time. I can see more things with it than I can just with a pure day count calendar, like the Julian day number, which I haven't really used too much. I used to use it initially to keep track of things, but now I use the Mayan calendar and, of course, the calendar converter. But it does have the Julian day number listed there. So we have these symbols, we have this Mayan calendar, we have these other calendars, and I think that we can use them because they're addressing prophetic issues. Now the Mayan calendar, of course, is an American calendar. Now the Mayans were really in, what we would call the Yucatan Peninsula, but this calendar was used in North America. It's just we have the best preserved records of it. And the Mayans. The Aztecs used it as well in Mexico, and we know that it was used even further north in North America, that versions of this day count system were used. So it tells us something, prophetically about the United States, and so that's why the Mayan calendar in this prophecy about U.S., it seems that it's going to be useful. And we also have the fact of the symbolism of it, because on December 21st, 2012, we moved into, well, we completed the 13th Baktum, which is a period from when the Mayan calendar began, which is a period of which would be 18,720,000 days from when it began on September 6th or 3114 BC. And that puts us in this period now where we reach that many Baktums, and then we have a date that always is going to start with 13, and then we can count these numbers of days. And there's a whole bunch of things connected with that. The point is, this calendar then says something about the period of time that we're in, and we've been able to connect it with our prediction in various ways. Now, the Islamic calendar also makes sense because the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar used by Islam. And so if you're talking about Islam, it makes sense to use their calendar. And there's some things we learned when we started using the Islamic calendar. One is the Islamic calendar starts in 622, and the first day of their first month is July 18th. So it starts on July 18th at sunset, and that's a Gregorian date. So this calendar here, gives us some symbols. It gives us the July 18th, which is what we're talking about in our prediction. So the fact that their calendar starts on July 18th, and also this becomes a symbol of June 22nd, which is a symbol of this movement. The organization of this movement, or God's leading of this movement, is symbolized by June 22nd, which is Samuel Snow's third letter, which is on Pentecost. And we have Pentecost marked in our history, and this June 22nd reoccurring in our history in a significant structural way. So we can see then that this, our message or this movement, is about this July 18th date. Now, in trying to address the prophecies, because this is about the prophecies of Josiah Litch and the prophecy of Josiah in Ezekiel, the question can be asked, why did God choose these people? Both, if we can look at it, we can see there's Ezekiel, and Ezekiel is a priest, so he obviously symbolizes this movement. He starts on midnight on the 5th day of the 4th month, prophesying, and his last recorded prophecy in his book is the 10th day of the 7th month. And both of those dates are July 21st and August 22nd, respectively, the same dates on the Gregorian calendar in 1844. That is the first disappointment, or the middle of from the first disappointment to the second disappointment. And it's midnight, and that's Boston. So we know Ezekiel is typifying Samuel Snow and his message in 1844. So it becomes this very powerful thing that God has chosen these prophets of the past to symbolize people in the future. And then he's using the prophecy of Josiah, and we know it's Josiah Litch. His prophecy affirmed the year-day principle, and Samuel Snow could not have made his prediction in the precise way that he did, picking the very day, without having Josiah Litch first picking the very day. So Josiah Litch picked the very day. So Samuel Snow then had confidence to pick the very day, the 10th day of the 7th month in 1844. And the other interesting thing is Samuel Snow uses the biblical calendar to do this, but Josiah Litch never used the biblical calendar. So when he comes to this date, August 11th, 1840, he's just using the Julian and the Gregorian without making a distinction. But we can now go back, because of the work that Samuel Snow did and the Millerites did. I could then look at these dates and apply the biblical calendar to them. So the two are tied together. The prophecy of Josiah, which Ezekiel uses, and Josiah Litch are tied together, plus Ezekiel and snow are tied together. So they become typical. I don't know if, this concept, we really understand the significance of it. So one of the things that I see in this movement is we at one time, we started to label people. Somebody would be Samuel Snow, or people would start to label themselves. They'd say, I'm Samuel Snow because I got this light. Or they, we'd name, somebody Miller. Now, it's true that a person's actions as an individual, he may not be Snow or he may not be Miller, but the choices, the action that he has can be typified by it. But it's a mistake to sort of attach that person then, just because he finds a certain amount of light, that he's now this person, and that he has some kind of authority or something because of that. And I think that was a great error that was brought in to the movement. I think that we saw early on people who were doing this would go off into darkness. So it's something that we have to be concerned about. But it also lessens the significance or the importance of the movement itself. So we can see that God is leading this movement, and this movement is not one person who's receiving all kinds of light. It's the movement that has received light. And so the movement has been typified by Miller. And we know when the dirt brush man came in and William Miller's second dream began to be fulfilled, and we started uncovering all this rubbish, it wasn't being uncovered for one person. It was being uncovered for people all over the world. At different times, were receiving light. And when they started to say, well, I received light, so now people should listen to me, I should have authority, then that became a real danger. And I think part of what happened last year is the result or the fruit of that, where people then thought that they had the authority to tell other people what to do, how to think. And it wasn't done through what I would call regular church authority, where we fellowship together and we allow God to lead us as a group. It was now, we have these prophets, and they now had to teach us, and this was not after God's order. So I think it's something quite important that we have to take into account when we look at this idea. So then, when we start to extrapolate this prophecy here, we know that God brought all these different people together, all these different minds, all these different lines of study, that in a sense we would say were independent. And he's brought them all together as wheels within wheels, that they all fit together, and we can see this perfect order. Now, I'm going to have to erase this because I want to look at how we could possibly support further these dates based upon Josiah Litch's prophecy. Because, we have this, the 0.5 years, and to some people this isn't sufficient. This was kind of a leap. But we already had, this. So, to me, this is kind of sufficient. But I wanted to look at other ways to do this. And so what we're going to look at is we're going to look at how I applied the Mayan calendar. So we're going to go back to the beginning of the end of, or to the end of the last study that we did last week on this. So I'll draw some of this up here again, but in a simplified manner. So we have this repeating symbol, but the real important dates, if we want to look at it, is this 391 years. And so we're just going to take this July 27th in 1840 and this July 27th in 1449. And we already addressed this period of time. And this period of time, I can't remember all the different dates. So I'm just going to bring up some on my computer. I'm just bringing up a slide here so I can see it nice and big. Okay, some of it's cut off. So that's not going to work. I'll have to do it this way. Okay. So we have this period of 391 years. So we already addressed the fact that this period of 391 years is special. Sometimes called the cycle of the ecliptic. There are other people who understood this, astronomers, who recognize that this period comes from Revelation 9:15 for the day, the month, and the year, if you exclude the hour. So if you take a day, a month, and a year, it's 391 years in prophetic time, and it produces this unique cycle, a very precise cycle of 391 years. And so they could see that this is obviously not random. It's something that, it's just not the fact that you can do that. You can take an hour, day, and a month, and year of prophetic time and produce this cycle where you can repeat. Once you go through and look at all the lunar eclipses here, you can just see that they're going to repeat again for the next 391 years within a very short period of time difference. I can't remember the amount of time, but it's not much difference in time, like an hour or less, something like that. I can't remember how exact this is, but this is one very, very exact cycle that occurs naturally. Now, it's broken up into these periods of time, which I addressed last time, but we're going to look at it again. That is, we know that the solar year is 365 days. So we'll just say that roughly. And the lunar year, so this is a solar year, and the lunar year is 12 months of months that are 29 and a half days long. So when you have a lunar year, the year ends up being about 354 days. That's because this one has 12 months times 30.44 days long. That's our Gregorian calendar. But this lunar calendar has 12 months in their year, which is 29.53 days long. So the length of their year is roughly 11 days less than our year. And so every year when you have Ramadan, it's going to be 11 days earlier on our calendar than it was the year before, because it's the same date every year on the Islamic calendar, but it moves 11 days. Now for them to go around and then have Ramadan, them to go around 1 year to match up to ours, the period of time that we would have to travel on our calendar is 33 years and 7 months. So this is quite interesting. It's a nice number. Now we could also say that there's 20 hours. So it's not a full day. So there's 30 years, 7 months, and 20 hours that we go in, or pardon me, we do 32 years. And there, in that same period of time, we'll cover 33 years, 7 months, and 20 hours. Now, their hours are the same as ours, but their months are not, and their years are not. Their months are shorter, right? Their months are this long. So these 7 months are not equivalent in time, and neither are these years equivalent in time. But if I give 33 years and 7 months and 20 hours on the Islamic calendar, it will have been actually 32 years and 7 months and 20 hours on our calendar. Now I could write this in a fraction, but I actually like it better like this. It's easier to do the math. The problem that we see here is that it's just like when you exchange American Canadian currency. They're both dollars, but you can be fooled in exchanging back and forth, because you have to realize that every time you take into account that you have Canadian dollars, they're worth a lot less than American dollars, except in 2007 we were higher. But so you know, you have this rate of exchange, and you can do you can fool people sometimes in exchanging money back and forth so that you actually end up at an advantage. This used to be one of those little tricks I had to figure out when I was a kid, one of those little math tricks. So we can see then that this period of time, we can also represent it in days. So their hours are the same and their days are the same, right? So we can count days because they're both solar days. Now this period of time is 11,900 days and 20 hours. For both of them, right? It's going to be the same thing. That period of time, if we counted it as days, it's going to be the same period of time. But it looks like a different period of time because these are shorter. Now, if we counted the hours, they'd be the same number of hours, right? But we just broke it down to the smallest elements. So the interesting thing about this is I can count the number of months. So we know that 32 years, to know how many months there are on our calendar, we would multiply it by 12. So if you took 32 times 12, this would end up being 384. And then I would add this 7 months. And I would find that this ends up being 391 months. So that's interesting because we can take this natural cycle that exists between the Islamic calendar, which is a lunar calendar, and our solar calendar. This cycle that when we go this length of time, 391 months, that it's the same, it's 1/12 of this period, 391 years. So that's interesting because then I know if I multiply the number of months by 12, obviously I would get this 391 years. So I could count how many months there are. It doesn't really matter the number of months in this whole period, at least I don't think it does. I haven't found a significance in it. But so the number of months here, or the number of years or the number of days, on our calendar, it's going to be different for the number of months. Because if we take the Islamic calendar, we'd have to multiply their year also by 12 months, but it would be 33 of their years. So if you take 33 times 12, they get this number, 403. Now, I haven't found any prophetic significance in this number. So there might be a significance in this one. Well, I shouldn't say it's 403. I would do the same thing. I would multiply it, right? And then I would add 7 months to it. So it would be 396, and then I would add 7 months to get 403, right? So they cover 403 months in the time that we do 391 months. But it's still 11,900 days, and the 20 hours I'm not counting here, because that's obviously going to still be 20 hours at the end of each of these. Now, so then we know that there's 12 periods of these in this whole time. Now I can multiply this by 12 to find out how many days this is. And the 20 hours, when I multiply it by 12, it gives me 10 extra days. Because if I multiplied this by 12, I would end up with 1,420 days and 800 days. 142,800 days. That's how many days I would end up. But when I take this 20 hours, I actually get 10 days here. So that's the number of days in 391 years. So there's all the math. I know people didn't really want to come for a math course, but I want to show you this to understand the significance of the Mayan calendar in trying to predict July 18th, 2020. So when I looked at this, the one thing I noticed is that it was similar or it's close to 144,000 days. Now, the Mayan calendar, you know, every time you look at this, these 5 digits, when you get to 1 here, you've covered 144,000 days. That is, it's 20 by 18 by 20 by 20 is 144,000. So once you had a number, if this was 0, 19, 19, 17, 19, and you had 1 more day, you would now have reached 144,000 days since it began. So this number here, the Baktung, represents 144,000 days. And so I knew this about the Mayan calendar, that it has this cycle. And so I thought, well, if I start here with the Mayan date, where will the Mayan date take me? And the Mayan date is 11, 8, 7, and 1. So that's the Mayan date. So it's 11 Baktuns. This would represent a period of 7,200 days times 11. This would represent a period of 20 days times 8. And this is just a period, wait, I'm going too far. Yeah, this would be 1 day. That would be a period of 7 times 20. This is a period, this is 360, this is 720, and this is 144,000 now. So this would represent 144,000 days times 11. So this is the date here. Now, what I want to do is I want to figure out where this date is going to move over here. I know it's going to be past here. So I'm somewhere here, I'm going to have the date 12, 11, 8, 7, 1. But it's 144,000 days, because I'm going to move here. I'm just going to change this digit and find out the difference between this and this. I wanted to know how many days that was. So then I took 144,000 and I subtracted 142,810. Now, we remember that this was a period of 12 different periods that were 11,900 days in 20 hours. And so when I subtracted these, I found I got this very interesting number. It was 1,190 days, which is 1/10 of this period. That was my answer. So I thought that was very peculiar, that I could now see that this period of time, this 391 years, which has this number that doesn't really mean anything, but that when I looked at it and compared this Baktun with this period, that the difference was 1/10 of 1/12. So that means I would take this number here, or this number here, I'd take 1/10 of 1/12. So I'd take a 1/12 of this, which would be this, and then I would take 1/10 of that, and that would be this. So this is the number of days, and then what I would need to do is see, well, what date is this? And I thought maybe I could use this principle that we used to come to July 18th to come to July 18th. You know, I thought, well, that would be really amazing if I could take this period of time, count from this date, and then I thought I'd take like 0.5 of this, do different things, and try out and find out what I came to. So this is what we're looking at. Now, you know, so this date is obviously going to be 1,190 days less than this. It actually wouldn't take me long to take this date, which is here, right? This is this date, and to figure out how to write this date just from having this date, because I can just subtract those number of days. So I would just take 360s, groups of 360s off of this, and I would lower this one. Then what I had left over, I'd take groups of 20s and lower this one, and then I would take whatever days are left and I would lower this one. And so it's really easy to count between these dates. It's not as easy as having a calendar converter, but it's definitely a simple system. So in doing this, one is it's another connection between the Mayan calendar and this. So even just in that sense, even if I'm not using it to sort of predict into the future, the fact that I have this relationship between 144,000, which is already a prophetic symbol for us, you know, and if you think about 144,000, that would be 12 times 12,000, right? This is less than 12,000. But the fact that this difference exists just amazes me. Still, it amazes me, because the likelihood of just having that occur, you know that this then is connected, that the Mayan calendar, the number 144,000 days, is connected to Josiah Litch's prophecy. So then the question is, how can I then look at this as I go into the future and look at July 18th? How is this going to relate to it? So it took me a little bit to sort of think it through. So first off, what I did is I looked at this date itself, and the date doesn't, and the other thing about the date is I wanted how far it's going to go. Now we know that the number of days from August 11th, 1840 to October 22nd, 1844 is 1,533 days. So right, this obviously is not going to reach to October 22nd, 1844. It's going to be short of that. But the date that I came to was October 30th, 1843. So this is 1843. Like this little box here. So now the number of days that this is to October 22nd, 1844 is also interesting. But, you know, you can see I'm not to October 22nd, 1844. I'm not to 1844. I'm to this period of time, about a year less. And it's almost one cycle of 360. I can't remember the number of days offhand, but you would basically take off 8. And so it ends up being like, I think it's like 354 days or something. So it actually ends up being like a lunar month difference, close to it, not exactly. So it didn't work out to some exact thing that I could say, okay, that's a really important date. And then when I tried to find the significance of this date, I couldn't really find it in Millerite history that there was anything significant about October 30th, 1843. I know that I know the Mayan date, you know, obviously is going to be 144,000 days difference, but there wasn't really anything significant about it beyond that. Now, I do need to address here the Islamic dates. So, so the Islamic date here is 27, as we talked about before, 27 day of the 5th month. The year that it is on their calendar, they count the years of the Hijrah, which is the flight from Mecca, which is in 622, and this date in 1449 is 853 years after the flight from Mecca. So that's their date, and they would call it the year of the Hijrah. And then, you know, this date here would also be the same, except that it's 27th day of the 5th month, but it's going to be in the year 1256 of the Hijrah. So we can see that this Islamic calendar has this properties, and if you counted the number of years between here, so I'm just kind of going back a little bit, on the Islamic calendar, this period is a period of 403 years, right? Just like this is a period of 403 months on the Islamic and 391 months on the Gregorian, and this is 391 years, 12 times that. This is also 12 times that. 12 times 403 months equals 403 years. So we have these dates here. I'm just going to move this over here. So then I tried to understand this relationship here, this relationship of the Islamic calendar, because it does bring significance later on. But it was this Mayan calendar date that then sort of intrigued me, because I have this connection here with this period of time by this fraction, right? So that's a 1/12, 1/10. So if I divide this by 12, I guess here we go. Divided by 12, divided by 10, it would equal, just do this way, equal 1190. So that fact becomes, to me, extremely important. So now we have this date over here, July 18th, and we have two of them, right? Remember, we have July 18th on the Gregorian and July 18th on the Julian, which is July 31st. And we have the symbol of the 26th day of the 4th month and this symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month. So we have these two symbols. And so I thought, well, maybe I can do something with this. So there's two different ways I did it, and I don't remember what they were. So I'm going to have to look at it here. Okay, so what I did is I took this number, 1/12, and I took a fifth of it, or I multiplied it by 5. And then I took this other number, and I multiplied it by 5, and I put it together. So I took this number, 1, 4, 2, 8, 10. So that's this period of time. And then I was going to divide it by 12. So I'm going to divide it by 12. I could do it this way. Divide it by 12 times 5. And then I would get this number, and then I'd add it to the same thing, except I'm going to divide it again. So I'm going to take this division. So I'm going to take this, and then I'm going to take 1/10 of it. So I'm going to take 1/10 of this. So you have to do 1, 4, 2, 8, 10, 0, divided by 12. And then I'm going to divide that by 10. And then I'm going to multiply it by 5 and add these together. So it seems rather convoluted, but the idea is that I'm going to take 1/12 of this. So I'm going to take that unit, divide this into 12, which is this, right? And that's this 1/10 and 1/12. So this is the smaller one, but I'm also going to take this unit. So I'm taking 5 of these, and I'm going to take 5 of these. And then I'm going to add them together. And then I wanted to see where it brought me on the number of days from here, right? So I'm going to count the number of days from July 27th and see how many days it is. Now, this would equal this number, 65454. That's what this number is. So then I wanted to see where that number of days brought me. So I'm going to count from here, and I'm going to count these number of days. But I'm going to find that it's going to bring me farther or less. It's not going to bring me all the way to where I want to go, right? It's going to bring me close, but it's not going to bring me all the way. So where it brought me was kind of interesting. So when I counted this numbers of days, 65454, it brought me to October 11th, 2019. So it brought me about a year past October 13th, 2018. So it brought me to this date, and I thought, well, it doesn't work. I'm short. I didn't reach to July 18th. So that was, just something I thought, well, it would have been nice if I had, but I came here to this date. And I'm using a principle of this 0.5, but I'm using it multiplying by 5. So I'm using the 5 as a symbol. So then I thought, well, maybe what I should do is use the period of 144,000 days. So then I just exchange these numbers. In my formula, and I'm going to get a different number of days. And the number of days that I'm going to get is a nice round number. It's 66,000 days, because using a nice round number, 144,000, you get this really nice number. And the thing is, this didn't bring me to the date that I wanted. This brought me past the date. So I'm just going to get rid of this date here for now. So we're just going to have the July 18th date there. But it's going to bring me past this date, and it's going to bring me to a date which is April 9th, 2021. Now, the thing about this date that's interesting is it's March 27th, 2021. And of course, we know this is a significant date. So this is the Julian date. Now, we know on our March 27 chiasm, the Levitical chiasm, that has these March 27ths in it, that chiasm is using March 27th on the Gregorian calendar, not April 9th on the Gregorian. But the fact that it gives us this symbol here is pretty significant, that this April 9th becomes significant. So I have these dates, and I thought, well, this is really interesting, because I have two different dates that are produced. So I have this one then that's going to be produced by simply using this 66,000 days from July 27th. And so maybe the dates in between, right? So, you know, we have chiasms before with dates on either side. So I thought, well, maybe July 18th is right in the center of these two dates. So then I counted out the number of days, and it didn't match up. It actually was a little bit off, but it was close. So and so, you know, to say that it's close, well, sometimes close is better than right on, because there's something else it's going to show you. So if I really wanted to put this date in the right spot, it would be a little bit to this side. So you've got July 18th here. And the date that it gives me is 8 days. If I look at the middle of this chiasm, it gives me, here, I'll just, it's 26th day of the 4th month. It's going to give me this date here, July 10th. July 10th is the center of these two dates. Now, July 10th is a symbol of the 10th day of the 7th month. So, and this is in 2020. So it's just 8 days short on this side. But the interesting thing about it is the number of days between these two dates. So the number of days between these two dates was 456 days, I believe, from October 11th to April 9th. So October 11th, 2019 to April 9th, 2021. And if I divided this by 2 to get where I got to my center, the number was, and this should be 556, I think, 556. Anyway, the number is 273. So that means from here to here is 273 days, and from here to here is 273 days. Pardon me, I'm doing this wrong. You got to put 273 here, and then let's get rid of this line. And then this is going to bring me also 273. So we already have the symbol of March 27th, which is April 9th. And we already had March 27th, 2021, which was 273 days, or 252 days from July 18th. And so you can see here, if I had 252 and I added 8 and 13 over here, I would get the 21 days to make 252 to be 273. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but this is 8 days. And this April 9th is 27 days, or 13 days later. So March 27th is on the Julian is 13 days later than March 27th Gregorian. And we know that from July 18th to March 27th Gregorian was 252. So I just take the 13 days here and the 8 days there. Now 13 and 8 are also important symbols. 8 represents, of course, the priests or the Levites, depending that's from 2 Chronicles chapter 29 and 30 of Hezekiah's Passover, or the cleansing of the temple that happens before the Passover. That happens in 2 periods of 8 days. One period of 8 days represents the priests, the other Levites. And then 13 is a symbol of rebellion, and it's also a symbol of Islam. And in this history, we have the symbol of the Levites here is 273, marked out in various different ways. So the fact that July 10th, 2020 is the center of this chiasm that's 273 days and 273 days, and it's 8 days short of July 18th, becomes extremely significant. Now, it doesn't give me July 18th. So, from a miss perspective, if you're looking for a hit, this is a miss if I'm trying to predict July 18th on its own. But from a information perspective, this is not a miss. This is a hit, and it gives us more information that we never had before. So we are now marking July 10th in our lines. Jeff hasn't, dealt a lot with it, but he's put it there as part of this structure. But we can see that this has something to do about the message to the Levites, and the fact that it's 8 days before July 18th is also very significant, right? So we can see that. So just before we stop for our short break, there's just one other thing. When I actually initially looked at this, I also thought, well, what if I started on this date? Now, of course, you could see if I used either of these two numbers, this one would bring me much farther into the future if I started from here and used this number. But for some reason, I made a mental error. Even though I'm good at numbers, I tend to be a bit dyslexic. And so sometimes I flip numbers around in my head. And so I actually did a count, but I typed this number in wrong. Instead, I put it as 64545. So I made this inversion of this number, the last parts of it. But I found if I counted that number of days from October 30th, 1843, it brought me exactly to July 18th, 2020. And the fact that we can do this with numbers, that we can flip them around, shows that I can then confirm July 18th by using this 144,000 mixed with the 142,810, because that's how I got this number, was using the 142,810 days times 5, divided by 12 times 5, and then divided by 12 divided by 10 times 5, and adding them together. So this becomes significant as well. So it affirms what we've already been doing, but it also gives me July 18th. Now, I probably wouldn't have come to July 18th on my own if I hadn't just had Josiah Litch's prophecy, and if I hadn't had Ezekiel's prophecy, pointing to the July 18th, just using the Mayan calendar. I wouldn't have gone through that process. But I can use it as an analytical tool to show that the Mayan calendar affirms the structure here that we see and the symbolism that we see for July 18th. So we're not, we're not proving it, and that's one of the problems. People want me to prove July 18th, 2020 is an attack on Nashville by Islam. And to prove that date, unequivocally, and I don't think that I can, in the sense that there's always room for doubt. But I would think, the preponderance of the evidence, if you were in a courtroom and you had to say, is July 18th, 2020 guilty? The jury would have to say, based on the preponderance of the evidence, it is, because we have so much evidence. And this is just part of it. But even just to say that I could use this and predict this date, we would have all these testimonies showing that we've picked the right year because we have all this structure, and we can show it through Ezekiel, through Josiah Litch's prophecy, and Josiah Litch's prophecy connected with the Mayan calendar. And then we get more and more witnesses from the Mayan calendar as we move on and we continue studying. We start to see that it shows us a lot more about all the dates in our history since December, and even some before December 21st, 2012. So we're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back and we'll look at questions and sort of go over some other points as well. So I'm just going to pause the recording. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you again. We invite you once again as we continue our study. Help us as we learn and grow. Help us as we learn from our mistakes, as you guide us and direct us. Thank you for this, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So while we were at the break, Stephen had brought up, he made a mistake in his calculation, but if you took this period of time, so if you put October 22nd in here, so we'll just put 10/22, 1844. If you put it in here, we know that from August 11th, which is a date over here, you've got 15 days here. From August 11th to October 22nd is 1,533 days. If you take this symbol of 1533 and you subtract this symbol of 11/9, you get 343. And 343, one thing is it's in the 70 weeks of Daniel. If you take the first period of 7 weeks multiplied by the last period, the last week, or you could look at it as 7 times 7 times 7 is 343. That's the number that's produced. But we know that this testifies to the 777 chiasm, and that this number here can symbolize November 9th, which is the starting point of the 777 chiasm that goes to December 25th, 2021. That has the 252 days to July 18th, and the 273 days from another period of 252 days from July 18th, which is March 27th to December 25th. So anyway, we have that symbol, this November 9th, is part of this 777 chiasm. So the fact that you have it here with this number becomes significant, and we can now match it to this symbol, and it gives us this symbol, 777. So, how God has done this, when you think about all these, all the probabilities. Now, if you have lots of options, you're always going to find some coincidences that exist. Coincidences do exist. But you're not going to have so many coincidences that exist in this connected way. Every time we add one of these things, one of these symbols or elements, and we find this, somebody can say, well, you have so many symbols, every number is a symbol. Well, every number isn't. We actually have a few symbols, a handful of symbols really that are numbers. But they're always in a structural way that they exist, that they don't exist arbitrarily, and they have multiple witnesses, multiple ways that we can look at it. And so when I look at the Mayan calendar thing that we did, and we saw how we came to this prediction, it produced a whole bunch of symbols that we already had, but it presented it in a structural way as well that continues to match. So every one of these symbols that has just been produced by using this are all these, basically we produced almost all of our symbols just using the Mayan calendar. There isn't really much that's not there. The 26th day of the 4th month, we're using as the starting point, so it doesn't produce it, at least I haven't seen it yet, but it does still produce it, all the other things connected with it. And there's probably more that we haven't seen, right? So I haven't actually analyzed much of these, you know, one I can see here, if you look at this date or this date, and I did this backwards, but nobody noticed that. So this is 12, 11, 8, 7, 1. But you can see, you know, the 8 and the 7 and the 1. Somebody could say, you know, you see July 18th in it here. You know, if you wanted to look at it that way. But I think there's a lot more significance when we start to analyze these different periods. In you know, the last three numbers on the Mayan calendar become very significant. In our line where we're 13.0, and then we have the three numbers at the end. And I haven't looked at this date to see where it lines up in 2020 or in 2019 or in 2021, wherever it lines up. I think it would be in 2021 once you get to this date. I'm not sure what date it is. You know, I'll just show you. You know, here's the kind of thing I do. I go to my calendar, converter, and I just type in the Mayan date, 8. So in 2020, it's in 2021, and it's March 30th, 2021. So, you know, right now we don't have any use for this in 2021 by taking these last three digits. But you don't know. We might find that March 30th, 2021 has some significance that we never saw. And we know we have March 27th, 2021, and, you know, it's 3 days after that, whether that has significance or not. So somebody could argue, well, we looked at a date, we looked at a number, but we didn't find any significance with it. And so we would make that as a miss. But I can tell you quite clearly the number of what we would call misses compared to the number of hits is a minuscule fraction. Almost everything I look at ends up being significant. You know, like taking this Mayan calendar, it's not like I tried hundreds of different ways to connect the Mayan calendar to July 18th, 2020. And there's some interesting things about it when I actually figured this out. I figured it out on this date, August 11th, 2019. So I have this date here, August 11th, 2019. Well, I shouldn't say I figured it out that day. It was actually like the day before, the night before. So, you know, somebody could argue, well, you know, I was off by a day. But I'd actually made a prediction about October 10th, 2019. And using the dark, it was the dark day prophecy from the Spirit of Prophecy and things she said about it. So I'd used this and I predicted October 10th. And October 10th, I then, that evening, so technically be the biblical date of the next day, I actually figured out this October 11th. And so really on that day, I figured this out. So it was really weird when I first did this calculation on October 10th on the evening, and I came to the next day, right? So that was kind of odd. And that was a Thursday, the 10th. So that evening, I did the calculation. I came to October 11th. I'm like, well, I had already predicted October 10th, where there was supposed to be this light that was going to come, dealing with giving the message to the Levites. That was the prediction. And then I got this light on that evening, but it was the next day that was in this calculation. And so, you know, I showed it to my nephew on October 11th. You know, here's what happens, and here's the date I come to. He says, that's today. But you know, so all these types of things, these significances that happen, you just keep hitting these targets. And then sometimes I do something and I don't understand the significance of it, but it shows up later. That is, I see it was significant, even though I didn't see it at the time. So just because I have a miss, don't understand some symbol, or I try something, later on, I tried again and I realized what I was missing. Now we have a couple of questions here or comments. Jeff mentioned recently the time from the 10/22/84 to 10/22/1849 being 1,844 days. Now it's actually to November 9th, 1849, that it's 1,844 days. So, you know, I understand. So that's one of the things that Stephen used to make a calculation to come to November 9th, is he counted the number of days left over from using a 359-day year, from counting from Pentecost, when Christ began his ministry in the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, which was June something. Can't remember the date.
17.
What's that?
June 17.
June 17th? Okay, I think that sounds right. 31 AD, and counting 1844 times 359. So he took out the days of atonement, and then once you got to October 22nd, 1844, you counted now those days of atonement that were left over from October 22nd, 1844, and arrived at November 9th, 1849. And so, yeah, and then from there you had this period of time, 318 days, which in prophetic time is 20 hours, 33 minutes, and it's 15 minutes and 33 seconds. So she just wrote that, yeah. So get those the other way around, 15 minutes and 33 seconds. And then she's asking about the 20 hours. Could they represent or have reference to the Mayan calendar, which uses multiples of 20? Well, I would think the 20 hours would be testified by the 11,900 days and 20 hours, or you could say 32 years, 7 months, and 20 hours. So the 20 hours becomes significant in that context. Is that correct, Stephen, how I explained your understanding of that?
Yeah, near enough.
Near enough? Okay. And the question was asked, is the number, by the way, July 27th, 1840 to October 11th, 1299, is this number, 65454. This 64545 goes from this date to July 18th. Right? So this is the number of days from July 27th that brought me to October 11th. So it's the first calculation that I did that was amiss. Right? The second calculation, replacing the 142810, replacing that, it brought me to here. And then the center of that was July 10th. So this number is counting from a different period of time. So hopefully that makes sense. So, you know, in trying to understand the prophecies of Josiah, so we have these prophecies of Josiah, Ezekiel, and Revelation 9, Josiah Litch, and we can see that there's a lot of light that has been missed. It was missed by the Millerites, and they couldn't have understood some of it. Now, they might have been able to use the biblical calendar once they had understood it, and then affirmed some things that we know, and they could have added more details like we did last week when we looked at the period of 12 days and the different events, which are the events that people mark. People mark the Treaty of Dardanelles, they mark the collective note, they mark the signing of the ultimatum, and of course they mark when the ultimatum was delivered on August 11th, 1840. So they mark all these dates. Other people have marked them, but they never understood the relationship to the biblical calendar before, and how, and the significance there that we talked about before is just that we have these Julian and Gregorian dates, and sometimes we have the Julian date that has the symbol, and the event is fulfilled earlier on the Gregorian date, in the case of the Treaty of Dardanelles and the collective note and the ultimatum, when it's signed, they're fulfilled 12 days before, because of the difference between the Julian and the Gregorian in the 1800s. And so when we deal with our history, and now we have July 18th Gregorian and July 18th Julian, the question is which date do we choose for the event? Now, of course, they have different symbols attached to them. 26th day of the 4th month, 10th day of the 5th month. But just because you have a date attached to, or a symbol attached to a date, doesn't mean that that's the date that it's fulfilled, because we know that from Josiah Litch's prophecy. And so that becomes a really important point in trying to understand, what are we going to be wrong in our prediction? Are we going to have a disappointment? Are we going to choose the wrong date? Now, I would say that we need to be a bit broader and say that we're not sure which date. July 18th may be the date that Nashville is attacked. To me, that seems the most likely from just the numbers point of view. But then when it comes to how God works with people, it seems like, and the fact that we know we're going to have a disappointment, maybe that's attached to the picking the wrong date. So what you do is you pick, more than one date, but maybe even those two dates, the symbolism that's there is not necessarily pointing to that date. And that's where we have to be careful. Because we have all these events, and we can look at them in one way, and we can say, because we have Hiroshima, and Hiroshima uses all these symbols again. It uses July 27th to Julian and Gregorian. It uses August 11th. It uses the 26th day of the 4th month. And, even as we saw, when we go, if I could put Hiroshima in here, it's probably not going to fit. So I'll just do it under here again. So just to kind of clarify this point, when we look at Hiroshima, Hiroshima is definitely connected with this, to understand this symbolism. And there's a point that I haven't really brought out. Stephen's the one who I think originally found it. Might have been Odilio. But we have Hiroshima here. So we have August 6th. This is 1945. And this is the 26th day of the 4th month. And so we got the first attack with the nuclear bomb. And when I looked at this originally, I was very surprised to see the symbol. So I thought, when's the first nuclear attack? Looked up this date, found this symbol. Sent it to Odilio, I remember. And he came back and he says, well, we also have August 9th, which is Nagasaki. And this is July 27th, Julian. Right? So we have this symbol here. And then he said, well, Kokura was going to be the second bomb on August 11th. But it moved 2 days earlier to Nagasaki due to the fact of bad weather, and they felt that this would be an easier location to hit their target. So, this is in a providence of God that Nagasaki was hit instead of Kokura, and that we created this date. But we also have the Potsdam Declaration, and this is received by Japan on July 27th, early in the morning, and they ignore it. So, and they intentionally ignore it. It's not like they didn't get it. They got it and they said, we're going to ignore it. And that's on July 27th, Gregorian. So that's also marked in this history. And then we also found that on July 16th was the first nuclear test at Alamogordo, how do you say that? So this is the July 16th, but this is the 5th day of the 4th month. So here we have a symbol that's not part of Josiah Litch's prophecy. This is a part of Millerite history. This is midnight. And a documentary that I watched on this first nuclear test, it was very interesting because when they came to July 16th, they show the screen. It's an old documentary, and they say midnight, July 16th. So they even mark that as at midnight, because they're anticipating the test the next day. And it was raining and it was going to be bad weather. They thought they might call off the test, but it turned out as a good day, so they did the test. But that's the midnight symbol. And of course, this is also midnight cry symbol, August 11th, or not this one, but August 15th. And this is when Japan surrenders. So from August 15th, you got the surrender. And so you have midnight and the midnight cry, and then you have the Julian and the Gregorian date, which comes from Josiah Litch's prophecy. You have the biblical date, and you have his end date, August 11th, all marked here in 1945. But the other significant fact is that when you go from July 27th in 1840 to August 11th, so these symbols of these dates, July 27th and August 11th, you went from here to here, you have 15 days. And 15 days, the symbol of it is 15 days is 10 days and 5 days. So you could see it as 105, which is the number of years from 1840 to 1945. And this is the number of years to the day. If you go from July 27th, this is the number of years to the day on the biblical calendar that you have Hiroshima occur. But we also know that this symbol of 105 can symbol the 10th day of the 5th month. So we have the symbol for July 18th on the Julian calendar in 2020. And then we have these symbols here, the 26th day of the 4th month. So we now are tying these two symbols together again, just by the period of time from here to here. So the 105 years, becomes extremely significant in that context. So you have both of these symbols now tied here by the period of time between these two events. Now, there was also the connection of the period of time from August 6th to July 18th, 2020. And this period of time is, can't remember the number of days, but it's 3,910 weeks and 5 days. So it's like 75375, I think. 75375 days, I think, is the number of days. But if you put it into weeks, you divide it by 7. This number here looks like it's divisible by 7. Not sure. 53, so is that divisible by 7? That's divisible by 7. The 753 divisible by 7. Anyway, I think that's correct. Now we can see the symbol of the 391.5. But there is also an argument made that we can then count from different events here. And I can't remember which ones they are, but we can count the 391 weeks and 5 days from these different events, and they give us dates in our history. So I know that in here, the number of days between these two dates is 11 days. The number of days here is 7 days, and this is 3 days, and this is 2 days, and this is 4 days, if I'm counting it correctly. And so must be doing something wrong. No, this is wrong. This is not 7. That's the one that's wrong. So this would be 11 days. So that's 11 days. Is that correct? 10 days. Yeah, that's 10 days. Because this should be 13 days, because this is July 27th, this is July 27th. In 1900s and in the 2000s, we're 13 days difference between these two calendars. And so I'm trying to think which date it is. I think if you go from, obviously if you counted from this date, it would bring you to July 10th, 2020. And this date is 9, so I can't remember. I think somebody counted from this date and came to some significant date. But the point is, we have this symbol that connects this history. Stephen probably has a comment.
Yeah, it's from July 16.
Yeah.
If you do the same, it's 3. If you add 3910 weeks and 5 days.
Yeah.
It takes you to the 27th
of
June 2020.
Okay.
And then if you don't bother with the 5 days, it takes you to 22nd.
Okay.
And the 27th is the 5th day of the 4th month.
Right. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, and which is really quite interesting that it ends up being the 5th day of the 4th month on the 27th of June. So, and that's a significant date. So the 27th of June was arrived at. I don't even remember how I arrived at that date. I'd have to look it up. Do you remember how I arrived at the 27th of June?
That was part of Samuel Snow's letters.
Yes, it's part of Samuel Snow's letters, but I actually found it as part of the structure. I don't remember what I used. I'd have to look that up again, how I arrived at it. It was something to do with, I don't remember. Here, I can look it up quickly. Just go here. Because I just need a chart with it in. Oh, that's what it was. It was 1,260 days from January 14th, 2017. And the significance of that, so if we remember, we have from January 14th, 2017, this is Jeff presenting in Alberta on Glen Park Road, the Glen Park Hall. He's presenting Paneum for the first time, where he's addressing the significance of the meaning of Pan, Peter Pan, Pandora's box, pandemic, panic, all these different pans. And then we would count 1,533 days to March 27th, 2021. So this became part of this structure of the symbol of the Levites, the 27th day of the 3rd month. What I noticed is that if we took 1260 out of it, the symbol that we have left is 273 days. So again, we have this symbol of the Levites. So obviously we can take this out of it because it's pointing to the symbol of the message to the Levites. But the date here is June 27th. So the suggestion is here, as we approach July 18th, 2020, this period of time, June 27th to July 18th, is a period of time. It's a period of 21 days. And so that period of 21 days, well, it's 27375. 27375 days. Thanks, Angela. So June 27th is 21 days, and 21 days is a symbol of midnight. It's also in Daniel chapter 10, the time he fasts and prays, And then the angel Gabriel comes to him and explains to him Daniel chapter 11. So there's like lots and lots and lots of symbolism that comes from this structure. And when Jeff, recognized this date, he wasn't even recognizing the structure at first. He just was mentioning this date. We then recognized this structure, first the 1533 days, and then this division. So this 1533 has these interesting characteristics. That one is that it produces two symbols, the 273 and the 1260. But also when you put it in here, it repeats that 273 in its end date. So, and then this date can also be understood because we know, as Stephen says, if we took out, if we counted the number of days, we took out the 5 days, we'd end on June 22nd. And June 22nd is Samuel Snow's third letter, Pentecost. It's a symbol of the light given to this movement. But also, so is 627, because we know in Ezekiel's history, we have 627 that he references with the 390 days, or the 40 days being 40 years, from 627 to 587. But also 622 he references as the 30 years from when he's giving his first prophecy on the 5th day of the 4th month. And that 30 years brings us to 627. 627 then is a symbol of June 27th. And 622 is a symbol of June 22nd. So those two dates go together. Samuel Snow wrote his third letter on Pentecost on June 22nd, and it's published June 27th. So again, the June 22nd and June 27th are tied together in Millerite history, and they're tied together in Ezekiel. And we know that Samuel Snow is Ezekiel. He's being typified by Ezekiel. So the fact that those two dates are tied together in Samuel Snow, and his message is going to be the midnight cry on the 5th day of the 4th month, and that Ezekiel starts on the 5th day of the 4th month, and he references these events, the 30th year, and then his prophecy, the 390 years and the 40 years, reference the other date, 627. It's just incredibly complex, but it keeps telling us the same information again and again. So, obviously, I always talk about the likelihood of these things happening. So the likelihood of something happening, if it's if you have two different events, but they're kind of disparate events and they're not connected, and you can then connect them through some kind of coincidence, it doesn't give meaning to those events, right? They just happen to be connected by coincidence. But when you have events that are already connected, they're connected thematically, they're connected prophetically through prophetic periods, they're connected through history, and they keep having multiple connections through all these different ways. What you have is structure. You have this complex timepiece, if you like, these wheels within wheels, these cogs within cogs, these gears, and things are all moving and rotating and connected together. And it's the sky, it's history. A person could say, well, that's astrology, but it's not. This is God guiding history in his providence, and we're not manipulating history, using these things. So this is not numerology in the typical sense of understanding. It's not magic. We're not doing magic. We're doing mathematics. We're looking at numbers, and we're looking at the connections. And these numbers have symbols, and some numbers have symbols in the Bible. They're symbols of things. There's all kinds of symbols that people accept. People accept, 70 AD as being the destruction of Jerusalem as a symbol. Many people who don't, have nothing to do with this message, many Adventists would accept the 30 years that Jesus, to his baptism, and comparing that to the 30 years that Joseph is when he stands before Pharaoh. They would take that symbol and recognize it. They will recognize the 30 years even in Ezekiel as a symbol. They'll recognize the number 7 as a symbol. So we recognize all these things as symbols. and sometimes we'll even take a Bible verse and the Bible verse itself, and some people will see those as symbols because what the verse is talking about, that number already symbolizes, and people say, well, it's a coincidence. But we start to see that it's God's providence that guides all these things. He's the one who guides the sky. He's the one who guides the day, the day and night. He guides the months. He guides the years. Man has no control over those things. Man only has control over the choices of his actions. But even God foresees those. And he, in his providence, he gives us these opportunities to recognize truth. And that's what prophecy is doing, is it's, as we pass through these prophecies, we should be seeing things. And the fact that Seventh-day Adventists generally aren't, one is they're not even recognizing fulfilled prophecy when it happens. So 1989, Soviet Union, their wall falls. That's a fulfillment of prophecy. I recognized it based on Daniel chapter 11 because I read Louis F. Weir's writings, and I knew that event was going to happen. And when it happened, that was fulfilled prophecy, but it wasn't recognized by the Seventh-day Adventist Church or Seventh-day Adventists in general. When 9/11 happened, again, you recognize it's prophetic, but they just see it, this is an opportunity, to reach out to Muslims, but they don't see any fulfillment of prophecy in it. Or then when we have the pandemic, again, nobody's recognizing the fulfillment of prophecy, or very few people are. Okay, so somebody wants to be a nitpicker. 556 divided by, so this number is probably not right. So if you want to count the number of days, you take 273 and multiply it by 2. So that'd be 6. Yeah, so it's 546. That's the number of days. And if you divide it by 2, will give you 273. So that's the number of days from October 11th, 2019 to April 19th, 2021. So so thanks for getting me to correct that number. So we have all these numbers, and I'm good at math conceptually, but I do lots of mistakes, do lots of dyslexia when it comes to numbers, and I can't add quickly when I'm talking. It's a different part of my brain that I'm using. So, but I can easily do math if I'm just doing math, but I can't speak and do math at the same time. But thanks for that. So it's good to have that number corrected. So
Theodore, I think some of your possible dyslexia could help with seeing the chiasms and the mirrors in things.
Possibly. I mean, it's not true to I'm truly dyslexic, but I write numbers down wrong all the time, and I see them wrong. So maybe there's a little bit of dyslexia there. I don't know.
I think we all have it.
But I remember numbers really well. So so that's kind of an odd thing. So it depends what I'm doing. But anyway, we all have particular minds. I mean, that's the interesting thing about this message. We have all these different minds, these different people with different experiences, and God, and that's what I've always wanted to see, is how God could bring together all these differences that, we often don't value. Sometimes, we see somebody as different than us and we're like, well, what's wrong with that person? Why can't they think like me? Why can't they see what I can see? But in reality, we need those differences, and God brings them all together to bring light. And so
Amen.
I always value all kinds of people, even people that are, especially value eccentric people, because I grew up around them. And I've always learned a lot from people who think very differently. And I've always tried to understand them. So, one was my dad. He had Asperger's, was not a social person, very confusing, very weird ideas. But I learned a lot by trying to understand him and communicate with him, even though it was almost impossible. but I applied that to other people that I ran into. I listened to them and try to figure out their world. And sometimes they would have a unique way of looking at something that would really help me. And there's one guy in particular that I deal with on Facebook. He's a Korean, and he's messed up. I mean, he's an Adventist, but there's something wrong with him. I mean, he probably has some kind of mental disorder. I'm not sure. Can't really diagnose him. He definitely has an antisocial personality. He has no friends at all. He says not a single friend. But he also looks at the Bible in very unique ways. But I've learned a lot, because sometimes he'll see things that I've never seen. And so a lot of the things that I got was from discussing things with him, and he would like be close to something, but because he had all these faulty ideas, then when he would come to these weird conclusions, but the information was there. And I've also noticed that God hides truth with, or not God, Satan hides truth with error. And God wants us we need to separate the precious from the vile. And that's sometimes hard to do. Some people think we shouldn't look at anything that isn't what we already believe. And, and obviously there's a danger just following speculative theories and so forth. But if somebody wants to communicate with me and I want to teach them truth, I need to understand what it is they think. If I'm going to communicate with them, I need to be able to sort of enter into their world to some degree, because I can't just dismiss them, and that's not ever going to help them, because people do have sometimes a desire to find truth, to follow truth, but they have faulty ideas. Like that would be us, most of our lives. We have all kinds of mixed up ideas. And if somebody just dismisses us, instead of actually helping us, we're not going to grow. So to me, this is, part of what, has helped me grow. And I spend most of my time, even when I first became an Adventist, reading anti-Adventist literature. That's how I studied Adventism, rather than reading Adventist literature. And this way I could examine the attacks and then figure it out from the Bible on my own, what the truth was. And then I would find that the church had the truth, because I didn't understand Adventism a lot when I joined it. I understood some things, but I came to understand it much more deeply by doing it that way than if I just, accepted what the pastor said or the evangelistic series, evangelist said. Instead, I studied things out. And I think that's an important point. And then we can dismiss people sometimes by their personality, sometimes by their mannerisms, their habits. They rub us the wrong way. But I can still learn a lot from a person who annoys me. And sometimes when a person really annoys me, I can actually learn the most. So I really try hard. When somebody annoys me, I think they're annoying me for a reason. So one is, there's something about me. It says more about me than it says about them. Because one is, I have no control over them, but I do have control over me. So when somebody really annoys me, I try to take that into account, that it's maybe saying something about me. But also sometimes I realize that they may have something that I need, and that I need to understand. So I will listen carefully to people that annoy me. So, those are important lessons to learn. But when it comes to this prophecy of Josiah, I don't know where we can go further in this study, other than, we could go further in the more how all these things relate. I think the only thing I could really do here is maybe take this further to deal with the 777s and further development of the Mayan calendar. Now, I did do a study on a Friday night study on that. So I'm not really sure where I could go with this one further on. There's obviously lots of details we could delve into. We could start looking into other things, other details that have been brought out here. But I think, this is basically, we've covered the prophecies of Josiah's prophecies, both Josiah Litch and the prophecy of Josiah, pretty sufficiently, I think, in these, I think this is the fourth class. So any final thoughts on this? Or maybe, because I'm not sure whether we're going to have a class next Thursday is kind of the question. whether I want to continue doing, because some of the classes I'm going to continue and some of the classes I might drop off. So it's kind of up to you. I'm going to send out an email to people and see if people want to continue this Thursday one or not. But I think, we can start dropping off some of the classes because some of them are going to be ended, and some of them we will still continue further on into May and some into June a little bit to kind of complete them. So I don't know what your ideas are on that, but any thoughts before we close?
Well, if you've nothing else to present on this topic, well, is there any point then having a class unless you're going to present something
That's
else?
what I'm saying. I mean, I could do another class at this time. Just wouldn't be the Prophecies of Josiah. But I think, we have a lot of classes, and a lot of those things are going to show up in the other classes. So my view would be next Thursday we wouldn't have a class. That would be my choice. But if people are comfortable with that, I would have to send out an email, though, and tell people that the schedule is going to change for next week.
I'm happy enough with that.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I mean, we're still going to have the Friday night studies where I try to do, more present stuff. But even then, in some of the other studies, I'm going to be doing some of the things that we did here. Because obviously I'm going to look more at some of the chronology and go into Samuel Snow's letters. So, yeah. So, I mean, if people are happy with that, I'm happy not to do as many, because these take a lot of energy. And some of the other ones are going to continue longer. And I'm also going to start working next week, which, normally I work Tuesdays and Thursdays. So this would end up, I could work a little bit longer on Thursdays. Wouldn't be so rushed. It'd give me a bit more time, too, to go out and exercise in the nice sunshine. Because we got a nice 10-kilometer walk just going around a lake right by our house here. So it's nice to do that in the middle of the day. So, but anyway, thanks a lot, everyone, for your participation in this. And, I think these 4 presentations, we talk about trying to get a simple presentation on July 18th. This obviously is not simple, but I think anybody watching this at least should have the background, should be able to get the background on how to present it from Ezekiel and Revelation 9. So let's close with prayer, and then we can say our goodbyes. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for the light that has been shining upon our path. And we're thankful, Lord, for the sacrifice of Christ, the work that he did for us when he was on earth, and the work that he's doing for us now as he ministers in the heavenly sanctuary. And we know, Lord, that we're in a time when the sealing message is completing its work. Judgment is passed to the living. And there's so many people that are in the valley of decision and have to choose between light and darkness. And we know the principle of that choice has to do with whether someone's willing to take up that cross daily and follow them. It's not an intellectual choice, but it does affect our intellect. And our intellect does affect that choice. And so we ask, Lord, that we can present light in a clear way, in a Christ-like way, to those who are in darkness, that we can be lights in darkness by our lives, by our witnesses, by our words. And we pray for each person who's participated in these studies and those that have watched them on the internet. We ask, Lord, that we can use this knowledge to help ourselves first, and then to help others. And be with us, each person, throughout the rest of this day and to the next time when we meet again. And we ask this and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, stop recording.